We have liftoff. Thank you. I'm really pleased that we have three exciting speakers this evening. First of all, we've got Tom Broughton, who is a long-standing campaigner locally on climate and environmental issues. He's one of the founder members of Transition Chichester and one of the directors of the community energy solar farm Meadow Blue. And then we have Tim Young, who's one of our Green Party district councillors, who, in his day job, works to provide rooftop solar power for businesses. And last but not least, we have Mark Linzey, chair of the local group SMART-FFF. This is a group of residents from South Mundham and Runcton, whose main theme is Fields for Food. This group opposes the industrialisation of their local rural area, in particular, the use of agricultural land for housing and a recent application for a solar farm. We are particularly grateful that Mark agreed to join us with very little notice, so thank you, Mark. Although this is a Green Party event, I would like to make it clear that all our contributors are speaking on their own behalf, and with the exception of our very own district councillor Tim, they are not members of the Green Party. Also, there can be conflicting points of view on some of the issues that we will touch on tonight. Rather than debate these differences tonight, we want this to be a listening event. Please listen to the points of view presented and feel free to ask questions at the end of each presentation, but please don't start a debate or argue with the speakers. And now I'm really happy to turn over to Tom.
Let's share my presentation. Right, can you confirm that you can see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so there's a big, first, can local solar help us achieve climate change targets? Okay. Let's see if I can advance it. Right, so I thought I'd go back to basics. And this is the Chichester District energy consumption in 2022. This is the most recent data because it's always published sort of 18 months after the event. And so this was published in June 24 for the consumption the year 2022. And as you can see, most of the energy consumption was with petroleum products. Most of that, of course, was transport, but there's heating in that as well. And then probably about, if you think about it, it's probably about a third is gas, and probably something like a fifth is electricity. And I apologize if I use lots of numbers like gigawatt hours and things like that, but that is the currency of this sphere of interest. And energy is measured in watt hours, and gigawatt hours just means billions of watt hours. But what's interesting is that if you look, our energy consumption is actually reduced by nearly 10% since 2018. I actually started this presentation, doing this presentation that long ago, and it's quite a significant reduction in energy consumption, especially gas, which is mainly used for heating. And so it's in a way, that's a good news story that our energy consumption is reducing. But how could we meet our energy demand through other means? And I'm going to focus on electricity because electricity is intended to be decarbonised by 2030. It's an incredibly ambitious target. We probably won't get there, but you know, at least it's a target worth aspiring to. And so let's see how we can sort of get the resources that we want from our energy, from electricity, rather than fossil fuels. And what I'm showing here is our gas demand is about 855 gigawatt hours a year. And if we use gas boilers, that means that we are using about 727 gigawatt hours of heat because gas boilers aren't 100% efficient. And 85% efficient is actually quite an efficient boiler. And of course, in the mix of boilers we have out there, we range from very efficient modern boilers, which can be over 90%, through to boilers which have probably been there since 1950s, which are probably down in the 50% efficiency level. 85% is a reasonable estimate of our current boiler efficiency. So just remember that number, 727 gigawatt hours of heat. So how can we get that heat? Well, you might have heard a lot about them. Heat pumps, I believe, is the way forward. And what was brilliant about heat pumps is that you only use 1 unit of electricity to create 3 units of heat, because the other 2 units are coming from the environment. And in this particular picture here, this is an air source heat pump. You can have ground source heat pumps, you can have water source heat pumps, and you can even have air-to-air heat pumps, which is another form of heat pump system which can be used. And air-to-air heat pumps are also used for air conditioning. So again, so to generate 727 gigawatt hours of heat, we'll only need to use 240 gigawatt hours of electricity. Then we look at our car consumption, petroleum consumption. And again, if we use electric vehicles rather than fossil fuel vehicles, you know, the amount of petroleum that we're using, if we take an average figure of 43 miles per gallon, which is the current average for new cars, then that's, you know, 1.4 billion miles a year, which is an incredible figure. And that's just within the Chichester district. But again, if we use electric vehicles, they're much more efficient. We'd only need 377 gigawatt hours of electricity in order to drive that distance with electric vehicles. So therefore, if you think about it then, so we have the electricity consumption is the same, it's 558, but for our heat, we'll only use 242 gigawatt hours, and our transport is 377. So again, our total energy consumption reduces, you know, we only use 42% of the energy that we use when we were burning fossil fuels. So it shows that electricity is far more efficient for getting the resources and the, if you like, the services we want from our energy rather than burning fossil fuels. So how can we meet that consumption? I'm a director of the Meadow Blue solar farm, which is sited between Chichester and Bognor. It's a community-owned solar farm. It's built in 2016. It's been running very well since then. And on average, it's a 5 megawatt solar farm. On average, it generates 5.7 gigawatt hours a year. That means it generates 1140 gigawatt hours per gigawatt. And so therefore, to achieve our target of electricity, we could generate all the electricity that we consume within the district to provide our heat, our transport, and our electricity demand by about 1 gigawatts of solar power sited within the district. Is that a target we should be aspiring to? There are other ways of looking at targets, and the Climate Change Committee published a report in 2020 talking about net zero by 2050. And they were saying that we should try and achieve 85 gigawatts of solar within the UK by 2050. In 2019, there were 13 gigawatts. So therefore, you know, if we look in Chichester, in 2019, we had 73 megawatts of solar. So that would mean that our target from grandfathering would be 475 megawatts. Another way to look at it, if you look at just the surface area of the Chichester district and compare that to the UK, again, that comes out at about 459 megawatts. But, and as I said earlier, to achieve all our energy consumption from within solar, within the area of the Chichester district, that's 1 gigawatt. So I just think 500 megawatts is a nice round number. And I think that is a reasonable target for the Chichester district to generate within its bounds by 2050. You know, this is my idea, and I just think that's a reasonable contribution. We're not generating all the energy that we need, but then we're going to have a lot of offshore wind, and so therefore, and we're going to have a lot of onshore wind, and so therefore we don't perhaps need to aspire to generate all that energy, but let's say nearly 50% of our energy is actually generated within our district. And what does that mean? Well, with modern solar panels, you know, we can generate nearly 1 megawatt per hectare. So therefore, to do 500 megawatts, like I say, it's 91 megawatts per square kilometre. So therefore, we'd need 5.5 square kilometres in order to generate 500 megawatts of solar, which is 0.7% of the area of the Chichester district. And what does that mean? Well, actually, it is the size of the Chiltern Peninsula. And that's the area of solar panels that would need to have sited on fields in order to achieve that 500 megawatt target. But CPRE have done some work, and they have evaluated all the roof space currently in the Chichester district, and they think that we could generate 200 megawatts of solar on the rooftops within the Chichester district, taken away from heritage buildings, although the cathedral's got a rather nice roof facing the right way. Anyway, so that's 200 megawatts, but it still means that we're to find somewhere else to generate the other 300 megawatts. But there's the argument about agricultural land. Yes, that is an issue, but this land is sort of relaxed, if you like, or set aside for 40 years. And so in 40 years' time, you're going to have highly productive land, which hasn't been pesticide, hasn't been have herbicides on, hasn't had fertilizers on. So, and there is this concept of agrivoltaics, where you mix agriculture and growing a crop. Some crops actually work better in shady conditions. And this actual picture here, as you might have seen it earlier, this is at the Meadow Blue solar farm, where we graze sheep amongst the solar panels. And they seem to like it because the panels provide shade. And so therefore they have shade in the summer, and also protection from the weather when the weather's not so good. But agrivoltaics is definitely a burgeoning technology. It's not quite on par economically with the normal sited solar farms, but it is something that could come along in time, certainly probably within the before 2050. And biodiversity, we actually did a biodiversity survey of the Meadow Blue solar farm, and we actually found, for example, 48 species of plants, within the farm. And there's an organisation called Solar Energy UK, and they have developed a standardised approach to monitoring biodiversity on solar farms. So therefore, you could be comparing like with like and comparing year with year. And what they're finding is that they are certainly biodiverse focal points, because you're not putting fertilizers on the land, you're not putting pesticides on the land, and not much in herbicides. And so solar farms could certainly be a biodiversity resource if it's managed well for that reason. And of course, I believe Mark is here today to talk about this one. This is in South Mundham, which is just south and east of Chichester. This is a 30 megawatt solar farm on agricultural land. Should we do this? I think perhaps we should, but again, as Anne said, we don't want to debate today, but we need to find somewhere to site, I think, 500 megawatts of solar, or 300 megawatts, because we can put 200 megawatts onto buildings. But then if you look at so that's solar on one side, and so looking at another way of thinking about it is this solar is going to contribute to our decarbonised grid. So if we have a decarbonised grid by 2030, how would that impact our trajectory that the Climate Change Committee have proposed that we should be following in order to be net zero by 2050? Now, these lines here, this orange line is the Climate Change Committee's published data for the emissions in the UK since 2005. And so I've normalised everything to 2005. And the blue line is the Chichester district's emissions. And then this green line, I've just extrapolated that blue line forward. And this turquoise line is the carbon budget that the Climate Change Committee are proposing that we should be meeting. So if we carry on going as the way we're going, the Chichester district are actually on track to meet the emissions target, which I think is quite a good news story, that we should perhaps promulgate a bit. We just need to keep on going in this direction. And that really means that we change fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles, and we change our fossil fueled heating to electric heating, being heat pumps, or even flats, for example. It might be better just to have storage heaters, that sort of thing, or high efficiency storage heaters. So I just thought then, well, within this district, what are causing those emissions? And this green line at the top here, this is land use change in forestry, which is positive, which is good, but it hasn't gone up that much actually. And forestry in this district hasn't really gone up very much in 2005, which is a bit disappointing. Is it, ash dieback? Has that caused a lot of reduction of forestry area? I don't know. But what's been reduced the most since 2005 is waste. And that's probably because of we're not using landfill anymore. And so the emissions of methane from landfill has gone down. But if you look at this pie chart here, waste is such a small proportion that significant reduction doesn't have much of an impact. But the bigger ones, which is like agriculture and transport, is actually these two here. So it's not a brilliant story. It's not the fastest reduction, but the biggest reduction, one of the biggest reducers in emissions is our domestic sector. And so if we look into that a bit further, it is because of the decarbonisation of electricity already. So this orange line is the domestic emissions caused by domestic gas, and the green line is other, like oil mainly. So because the decarbonisation of electricity, our reduction in emissions in the domestic sector has gone down quite significantly since 2005. Then if we look at agriculture, because the electricity and gas is not a significant aspect to the emissions from agriculture, then the reduction in electricity, for example, this blue line, isn't a significant reduction. But what is interesting is that the livestock emissions have really come down quite significantly since 2005. And looking at transport emissions, as you can imagine, most of it is from road transport. So the blue line is from A roads, and the orange line is from minor roads within the Chichester district. And obviously these dips, as you can see, were obviously during the lockdown period. So if we wanted to meet the target that the Climate Change Commission are proposing by 2030, how can we do that? And it's actually quite a good story, because we need to reduce our emissions by 34% from 2022. And if we decarbonise our electricity grid, and I'm saying, let's say we have a 95% reduction in emissions from electricity, not 100% reduction, then the emissions from our electricity consumption within the district would fall, to 112 by 112 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent. But if we replaced all our heaters, our gas and oil heaters, with heat pumps, then that would mean by 2030, 17% of our heaters would be heat pumps, based on the national target of 600,000 heat pumps by 2028. And so this is based on national targets. So we're not doing any more than what the national targets are. So anyway, so if we did that and we meet that, then another thing is if we also meet the national targets for electric vehicles, the last government relaxed those numbers. So we were meant to be, electric vehicles were meant to be the only vehicles that you could sell in 2030, but they relaxed that to 2035. And so by 2030, the last government was saying we needed 80% of internal combustion engines for cars to be electric, and 70% of commercial vehicles to be electric. And if we meet those national targets, that would mean that by 2030, 25% of all vehicles on the road would be electric. And these are national targets. So again, if we meet these national targets, how will that affect our emissions reductions within the district? And again, you don't have to go through these numbers in any detail, or the total reduction by 2030 from 2022 would be 95 kilotons of carbon dioxide. So if we pull it all together, and so the electricity reductions is 112, heat and road transport is 95, and if we continue the reduction in emissions in the agricultural livestock as we have been reducing, just extrapolating that to 2030, that's 10. The total is 217. We only need to reduce our emissions by 209. So we're actually 7 kilotons of carbon dioxide over the target. And so I feel that's a good news story. You know, so if we meet national targets on electric vehicles and heat pumps, then the Chichester district are following the trajectory that the Climate Change Committee have proposed to reach net zero by 2050. And I think that's a good news story that we should promulgate. So yes, we can. So and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Tom. Now, I'm very, very nerdy, so I loved that. I do love graphs, and I especially love a nice pie chart, so congratulations. I've got a question. First of all, do you know why the livestock emissions have gone down? Because as I understood it, that was one of the really difficult things to do.
I really don't. It's obviously just within the district. Is it because within the district they've moved away from livestock and they're having other crops? I really don't understand that. It would be good to know.
Mm-hmm. And then my other question was, what is grandfathering?
It's effectively what we're doing this year projected forward.
Okay.
So in 2019, we were doing, we had about 73 megawatts of solar installed. And so you project that forward to 2050. So 73 megawatts of the installed solar in 2019, the national figure. And we want a national figure of 85 gigawatts by 2050. What does that mean locally?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Thank you. Isabel.
Thanks, Tom. That's so kind of inspiring. I just wondered about your data. How much do you tie in with the district council on this? Have you sent all this to them, or did you get the figures from them?
I presented this to them before. This is national data. This is what the government publishes every June for the previous two
years. Right, so you can cut it you can cut it with those borders, can you?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so the district council should have been on top of looking at that anyway. Correct. I'm just wondering if it feeds into their local plan in terms of their carbon emissions target.
You know, I was part of the Chichester District Council's renewable energy working group. And
I know you were.
And, yes.
Now I know you've been very disappointed in their performance so far.
Yes, and to be honest, I was thinking one of the reasons I'd started this presentation. Well, I did this presentation back in 2020, and I refreshed it recently. That's why I was really pleased with the reduction in our consumption. And I was really thinking about the climate emergency action plan, of which 50% of those words are probably true, because it certainly doesn't have much action in it, and it's not an emergency. So I'm just being a bit facetious.
Yeah. But I mean, do they obviously? I mean, there's this. We had this in Arran as well, where Arran would only look at Arran District Council's emissions. Yeah. And it's so important that the council widens it out to the whole district. Not that they can control what people do, but obviously it's a matter of how much, like you've got your solar farm that you're involved with, and others will be run by private individuals. But how do you control how much solar can be, who's kind of coordinating it to make sure that all of this happens? Is it just completely random, or is anyone saying, well, we want this many farms, so we'll allow this many farms? Or
every year the government has this thing called contracts for difference. where they sort of say we want to have this much solar, this much offshore wind, this much onshore wind, and then they go to auction, and then they get the best prices. And 2 years ago, the last auction underneath with the Tory government, the price that they proposed for offshore wind was so poor, so low, they got no takers at all. Last year, they were more realistic with the price that they were proposing to pay for offshore, and they got several gigawatts. And so these technologies are sort of like managed nationally. I'm focusing on solar because we live in the sunniest places in the country, and it seems like the best place to put solar. If you have a resource, one should make the most of it.
Yeah. Just sorry, I won't hog the thing because I'm sure other people want to ask you things. But when you say that's, obviously that energy is actually going into the national grid, isn't it? But you're assuming because it's produced locally, it's contributing to our local target.
Well, if you think about it, with the way that electricity works, it goes to the closest demand. It is like a flow of water. You can think about it that way.
You could do, couldn't you? Yeah, I know. With the wind farm that's being proposed, it doesn't work like that. But
well,
you could say we need it. The whole country needs it, so it doesn't matter. But yeah. Anyway, thank you. Sorry, thank you for that. Brilliant. I'd love you to do it for Aaron.
Yes,
you've got time.
Yes, yeah.
I might be in touch with you about that.
I go to David. Benedict, was it your hand up and I accidentally took it out?
No, I took it myself out. I'm
okay.
Yeah.
In that case, David, please.
Yes, that was a great talk. There's a couple of questions. One is somewhat off-piste. You mentioned biodiversity and showed some pictures and flowers around the solar panels. I run some forestry, and when you have areas like this, glades or rides, there's a cost to maintaining that and to encouraging biodiversity, cutting it and so on. Are there grants available to people with solar panels, or do they have a budget to do that so they can actually promote that biodiversity actively rather than just noticing there are flowers there?
I guess the thing is you don't want to have trees growing in front of solar panels. So,
no, nothing to do with trees. I'm talking about small plants.
Okay. I think there's no national drive to make solar farms as biodiverse as possible. But I think things like the Solar Energy UK, who are like a trade body for solar energy, they are trying to encourage solar farm owners to make their solar farms as biodiverse as possible. At the moment, there is no incentive to do so, but typically you want to keep the grass under control because you don't want it to get too tall to cause shading issues on your panels. And you can do things like grazing sheep, which will keep it under control. But again, you can overgraze and you could just make it into a barren, muddy field. And so it's, at the moment, I think it's more like peer pressure. But what I've found is that the solar industry so far have been pretty good at being quite environmental. Because one of the things that I really liked was because I used to install solar panels for a company, and there's this thing called PV cycle, where for every panel sold, a little bit of money is put aside in order to fund recycling facilities when they're needed. At the moment, there aren't many facilities because there isn't much demand because the panels aren't old enough yet, because they'll last probably 30 years before they need replacing. But I think at the moment, there's no national incentive, but it's almost like a peer pressure thing.
Okay. My second question was, I remember reading many years ago that with electricity transmission, you lost something like 30% over every 100 miles or so, which sort of would reflect on producing lots of electricity in Chichester, then pumping up to London. Is that an accurate figure, or what sort of how much electricity is lost per unit of distance?
The national figure, I believe, for losses in this network is about 6 or 7%. But
Over what distance?
Over the grid as a whole.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
But if you're transmitting electricity over long distances, then you change the technology you use. For example, they are building a cable between here and Morocco to transmit electricity, and they're even thinking about putting a cable across the Atlantic to connect America to UK, and that uses DC electricity rather than AC electricity, and that doesn't lose as much energy. In fact, it loses very little energy over a long distance rather than AC. AC has strange effects when you go to a long distance. And there was even a project where they were going to put solar arrays in the Sahara Desert and have cables going across the Mediterranean to the northern Europe. And so transmitting electricity over long distances is possible, but it's not using AC, it's using DC.
I think Isabel's saying that let's forget about having a cable to America at the moment.
Yes.
For God's sake.
Changing.
Goodness sake, what? I hope this isn't going to happen. It's crazy. They can generate their own power. They can drill, baby, drill.
However, that's getting into beyond listening, so I'm going to stop that conversation now.
Sorry about that.
It looks as though we've finished the questions for the moment. So in that case, could I ask Tim to start contributing?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, and thank you, Tom. That was a super presentation, and touches on a couple of points that I was going to make about rooftop solar. I'd like to build on what Tom's said, and add some comments from my experience in commercial rooftop solar. I'm a project manager for a firm that installs on factory roofs. Our process is to speak to businesses about their energy use, look at their premises, and then design a solar project which is the right size to match their energy use. The key to sizing a system for a business is to size it just right to get the right return on investment, and just the right size in solar terms means that the solar is not producing more energy than the business needs in the summer months. Because it's solar, and because we're in the UK, a solar system will produce around 5 times more energy in the summer than it does in the winter. An interesting point is that in the UK, you can't really be self-sufficient with solar. If you were producing enough energy for your business in January, then you'd be producing 5 times more than you needed in the summer. Of course, some businesses are better suited to solar than others. A refrigeration business or any business which uses more energy in the summer is a good fit for solar. Now, the advantage, and Tom mentioned rooftop solar, the advantage that commercial rooftop solar has over solar farms. There are a few advantages. The first is structure. A solar farm requires panels to be placed on a steel structure, and we saw images of that in Tom's presentation. They're placed with spaces between them to avoid shading. Of course, if you put panels onto a steel roof, you already have the 6-degree pitch ready there. The structure already exists. You don't need spaces between the panels. It's a bit more efficient. In terms of space, and this is very pertinent to tonight's discussion, the roof is an existing part of the business which isn't being used. You don't need to buy a field. And of course, shading. It's 10 meters up on the roof of the business. There's no trees, no hedges, just the occasional chimney. In terms of infrastructure, and we've talked about this already about transmitting electricity, but if you're generating electricity on the roof of your building, you're using it where you produce it. The energy drops straight from the roof into an inverter, into a distribution board, and into the building where it's needed. And a final point is about working hours. This is really commercial solar versus domestic solar. A domestic solar project, of course, we're at work while the sun's shining on our roofs, and that's why domestic projects often have batteries. Of course, for commercial solar, the sun is shining on the business while during the working day, while the factory is working. Now, those opposed to solar farms might well be asking, if rooftop solar is so good, why not just cover every roof? And Tom's touched on that really nicely by talking about scale and size and what is needed for here in Chichester, and that's probably the key issue. And hopefully I can put some visuals to those numbers that Tom gave. So Tom talked about. And Tom talked about the scale of requiring 500 megawatts of solar projects, of solar capacity for the Chichester area. Now, that's 500 megawatts. To give an idea, if we put solar on Chichester Sainsbury's, a building we all know, that would be around 1 megawatt. Now, there aren't 500 Sainsbury's style size businesses in the Chichester area, so there just isn't enough capacity. So there has to be a mix between if we were to achieve 500 megawatts of solar capacity in Chichester, there would have to be a mix between commercial buildings and on agricultural sites. So Sainsbury's would be around 1/500th of what's needed. Now, there aren't 500 Sainsbury's, but there probably are around 200 Sainsbury's types businesses, size buildings in Chichester, and that was the target that Tom set in his presentation. The other reason for that every building doesn't have solar is infrastructure, and we've talked about grid already tonight. So the UK grid was not designed for small energy production. A major solar farm project will be integrated with the grid from its design stage, and the grid will have been upgraded to have infrastructure to feed in large amounts of energy. But for a factory, a factory or an industrial estate is not set up for that. Every rooftop commercial solar project has to get permission from the local grid. And as I say, the grid wasn't designed for this. Some projects can be refused, others can be limited in size or limited by how much they can send back to the grid. The details of this is that if there isn't enough capacity in the local grid, and if there isn't enough infrastructure, then the grid can ask the business if they'd like to pay to upgrade the connections so that they can have the project. But this isn't ideal. It's easier for us to be and more cost effective to design a solar project that is the right size for an individual customer. One other point is energy use. So Sainsbury's, the example we've given, probably do use an awful lot of electricity with all their refrigeration, but large warehouse buildings, the sort that we see on motorways, which look like they would be ideal for solar with their big steel roofs, tend not to use very much electricity themselves. So there isn't the opportunity for them to produce the electricity and use it themselves. Of course, they could sell the electricity back to the grid, but we've just touched on those infrastructure issues. Now, my experience in the solar business is that every decision is commercial. When we're talking to business owners, it is always driven by commercials. The sign-off is done by financial directors, and even though CO2 savings and doing the right thing by the environment will be a factor, ultimately it comes back to payback periods. A really interesting point about renewables, and a point that's often misunderstood, is that certainly for commercial solar, there are no grants available. These projects really do stand on their own feet. They are commercially viable. They have a payback period of under 3 years, and they have to compete with other business interests, competing interests like buying other equipment or buying a different fleet. They have to compete with other investment opportunities, and they do. A final point I wanted this I think really relevant, and someone mentioned it already, a sort of an onus on us in the south of England to take on solar projects, or a willingness to take on solar projects because we're here in the south of England. There is a real difference in performance of having a solar project here on the south coast, or even just a little bit further north. And we see this when we do the calculations for our projects. We have the business I work for, we have a production forecast tool where we say, if we use this make and model of panel, this make and model of inverter on this roof, in this location, and the orientation of the building as well, we get a performance number for the building, a performance number that says for every 1 kilowatt peak that is on the roof, or every 1 kilowatt that goes on the roof of the building, this panel will produce X number of kilowatt hours. And we actually notice the difference between a project here in Chichester or in Bournemouth, where you would get around 1,000 kilowatt hours per kilowatt peak, up to sort of Northampton, North London, that sort of area, it might be sort of 900. Up towards Manchester, it would be more like 850. We do have projects in Scotland, but there's a real advantage to having them here on the south coast. A project in Sussex really will be a high performing project. That's important to note. A final point, and I was just reminded of this the other night when I was driving through Portsmouth. And one that wasn't covered is car park covering. This is a new bit of solar and something I'm not really familiar with. But one of the biggest projects is on the old IBM Riverside site. You can just about see it from the A27. As you drive past, this is solar projects covering a car park. And if we're looking for land and looking for brownfield sites, and we're limited to the number of rooftop commercial sites, then that's something we should be considering. And of course, we'll all know that the district council owns the car parks in Chichester. I'll mention it to the Lib Dem. Those were my thoughts. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I'd like to start, Tim. You were saying that a company, you'll calculate for the electricity they need in the summer months, and that's what you will install. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also explained partly why, but it seems to me that if you've got a very large warehouse, is there no commercial reason why they would produce excess and put it into the grid?
Yeah, I mean that's it in a nutshell, and it is frustrating. It is frustrating. You could have a warehouse building, and you'll see this now that we've had the talk about it. You'll be driving along, you see a warehouse, and a small part of their rooftop is covered, and you think, well, why didn't they cover the whole thing? And the reason for that is they've just done it for the amount that they need at their peak consumption in the middle of the summer. And it's frustrating. They could cover the whole roof, but the cost of that would be prohibitively large, and they would be selling back to the grid for a small amount of what they produce. And if your primary business is manufacturing something, you don't want to become a sort of a rooftop solar farm. Now, outside, above our pay grade, I suppose, but a national solution could be, if there was a real willingness, it could be the case that the government paid the same amount to send electricity back to the grid as the customer spends to buy it. But until they do that, it wouldn't be worthwhile. It will always be, if you're buying electricity at 27 pence and selling it back at 10 pence, then you're just going to size the system optimally. You're not going to use your cash to just to put solar on your roof. Unfortunately,
Government are going to try and triple solar energy in 5 short years. Maybe they should be looking at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd be all in favour of that. But the reality is that's that's the limit. That's the limiting factor, Anne. But you're absolutely right. So yeah, the warehouse area in Chichester, that that's the key. You've got these warehouses in Chichester. They would, if they had solar, they would have the right amount of solar for them. They wouldn't buy into covering the whole roof if they didn't need it, unless there was some sort of government intervention.
Benedict, you've got a question. Want to unmute?
Hi, yeah. Thanks, Tom. That was a great presentation, very pragmatic. I was just interested about this like selling pipeline. So like I think I had a friend with solar panels and they said that they used to get more money for the energy they sold, and that's now changed. I don't know if that's completely true. But is it so they're selling to the grid? Like, are they selling to individual energy companies, or are they selling to the government? Like, could you just run over that? I'm kind of interested.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I can touch on that. Thanks, Benedict. Tom made a really good point early on, that the government did have a price for offshore wind of 4.4 pence. Recently increased that to 7.7 pence. I'm just putting that to sort of bracket it. Obviously, that's clean renewable energy, 7.7 pence. The way you would go about selling energy back to the grid is you literally go to an electricity broker and sell electricity in the same way as you would buy it. You choose the best price. You go to them and say, look, this is the amount of electricity we've got to sell back, and you negotiate a price. And it's possible to get around 10 pence per kilowatt hour if you have a commercial solar project. So there is a good argument for oversizing. To Anne's point, there is an argument for oversizing the project slightly and selling back to the grid. And the way you do it is exactly as you thought, Benedict. It's to negotiate with an electricity company, work out a price, and take it. And yeah, that would be about 10 pence per kilowatt hour would be realistic. We had customers that got up to 17 pence during that energy crisis. The reason that those numbers sound a little bit high is that if you as a customer were to buy green energy, the energy companies would charge you a little bit more. And of course, what a green project is putting into the grid, what a solar project is putting into the grid is green energy. So it has a higher value that the energy company can effectively pass on.
Okay, thank you. That's a lot of food for thought yet again. Sorry, Isabel, go on quickly.
Oh, okay. If we got time for me to, yeah, I'm
Quick,
sure.
yes,
It was just to say, I think France introduced a law. I don't know if it's still the case that all new factory buildings had to have either solar or green roofs. You know about that?
That's quite a few years
So
ago.
they must have. I don't know how they have done it economically. I think I just wondered if you knew whether they had made the building owners pay, or if they had some kind of government, and presumably there is a government incentive. And by the way, it's disgraceful that there isn't. I've put solar panels on my house and I've got 15p through Octopus Energy, but nothing at all from the government at all. No grant for the panels, nothing. It's absolutely shocking. People, it just means people have to put their hand in their pocket because they believe in it, but it's not financially viable at all. Just makes you feel good.
Right, thanks, Isabel. I think now, thank you, Mark, for waiting so long.
So I presume that Tim doesn't know about France.
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Sorry, that was my
Isabel.
question.
I'm sorry, Isabel. I don't even know the case for the UK. I'm sorry to say. Okay. I don't know, so I'll have to look into that.
I think they are doing it, but so it would be interesting to find out how.
I'll try and find it.
I'll find it. I'll look it up.
Can I make a point about government intervention, because I can see a couple of comments about this, and I now don't hold me to these numbers exactly, but the principle is there. We have to be careful about government intervention. It is the case that with current electricity prices, where electricity prices at the moment, solar, domestic solar, domestic solar and commercial solar does make sense. It pays for itself. It doesn't need government intervention. And government intervention can often have perverse incentives. So you'd be incentivizing someone who doesn't have a house which is optimum for solar to have solar, which is actually just a perverse incentive and puts up the price of solar for everyone and puts up our council bills. The case was that the installers, and I work for a commercial installer, not a domestic installer, but the installers were effectively taking the margins. So you don't have, if you speak to someone about solar, they will say, the cost of my project was £13,000. Sorry, the government had an incentive of £5,000, for example. The price has gone from 13,000. The cost was 13,000 and there was a grant of 5,000. If you go to get a project now, it would be £8,000. The price is still the price. You would still be paying the same amount. The government grant has gone, but I don't believe that the cost of domestic solar has actually gone up. And with the price of energy has gone up. So I believe that domestic solar still does make sense. But we have to be careful of government support because it can create perverse incentives. It was super important. It was super important at the beginning to get the industry started. But I think the industry probably stands on its own 2 feet now.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to.
Oh, that's really interesting,
Can I
actually,
really
Tim. Thanks for
move
that.
over to Mark now because he's been waiting so patiently.
Fine.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mark.
let's try and share this. Okay, here we go. Okay, does everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thanks, guys, for that. Tim, really interesting. Some very good points there. Things that I didn't know, which very useful for me. Thank you. Some very well made points. Okay. May last year, I got home from work to find a letter through my door advising of an exhibition in the village hall to discuss a solar farm proposal. The letter was not personalised and was delivered to 8 houses in South Mundham and Runcton, giving just 5 days' notice of a meeting to be held between 3:30 and 6. The parish council were given the same notice, despite the village hall having been booked for several months prior under the name of BNRG. At the exhibition, we were told not to bother objecting to the future application as it was a done deal. The applicant had submitted a pre-app and council had agreed in principle. Because of the short notice, the time of day, not good for working people between 3:30 and 6 o'clock, lack of advertising, only 63 people attended. The applicant, BNRG Langmead, felt that 3% of the population was a good turnout. North Mundham Parish Council requested a full public consultation to give more parishioners an opportunity to attend, but the applicant's agent refused. A number of locals were concerned the effect on the landscape and ecology. So the objection group, SMART-FFF, South Mundham and Runcton Trustees, Fields for Food, was formed. Firstly, I'd like to say, so you don't get the wrong impression, we are pro-solar, we're pro-renewables, but in the right places, solar in the right places. We strongly believe that every new build house should have a solar on the roof. Don't understand why that's not happening. It makes no sense at all. And also not just south facing, can be east and west as well. It's also productive. Tim's point, you know, every day I drive past and I see all these warehouses and all I can think is, why is there not solar on that roof? It's screaming out to have solar on it. Why is there not solar on the council building roofs? Strongly believe in solar in those places, on brownfield sites and on poorer agricultural land, but not on high-grade farmland. BNRG Langmead, I want to talk about the BNRG Langmead in the proposal and why we are objecting to it. So if I move to the next slide. This is kind of the area out here, all across this area here. That's half of it, and then to the right-hand side is the eastern portion of it. This land, the applicant claims that the land is 74% BMV. BMV, just for clarity, that's best and most versatile. That's grade 1, 2, and 3A farmlands. That's excellent, very good, and good farmland. From historical data, we actually believe that the percentage, the 74%, is higher. We asked the applicant if we could carry out independent soil testing, but we weren't allowed to do that. This land had previously been marketed by Broughton Partners in the top 10% in the country. It has its own water reservoir and it's got underground pipelines. So it can carry out its own summer watering, which is very unique. With the UK importing 40% of its food, we strongly believe that BMV land should be retained for food production. Land available for food production is at its lowest level since the Second World War. With current global uncertainties, food security is vital for this country. Other point is you all know about, I'm sure, about the wildlife corridors. The eastern portion down here, the eastern half of this proposed solar farm is right where the wildlife corridor runs. CDC have spent over £500,000 in identifying and protecting these corridors and employ a specialist team to manage them. You can see over here, actually you can't see it here, there's a pond that I'll talk about in a minute as well. CDC described these as the jewels of biodiversity, and they're an important part of the new local plan 21 to 39, due to be adopted next month. The CDC strategy is to protect and enhance these natural environments. Let's move on to that. So this whole area is full of wildlife. Langmead, the applicant, is objecting to the wildlife corridor and wants to move the wildlife corridor to Arran. The only problem is that no one has told the animals. The other point about this area is its amenity value. Many people visit our village for walking, cycling, horse riding, or just getting some fresh air. With the increasing urbanisation of our area, people need tranquil rural spaces to exercise and for their mental well-being. Our single carriageway lanes are not suitable for heavy traffic. There's 18 months of construction traffic proposed. This will be a big safety issue for all the road users. You've got to remember, we don't have any pavements here. The roads are also for pedestrian access. This here is Cammick Pond. This is the site over here. So right here is Cammick Pond, which Cammick Pond dates back to the 17th century and is a home to water voles. I don't know if any of you are aware, but water voles are Britain's rarest mammal. Moving on to the next one. This here is where the applicant is proposing to site transformers and substations directly opposite Cammick Pond here. The CPRE and Manhood Heritage and Wildlife Group have strongly objected to this application. The siting of the inverters will increase the ambient noise level from its current level at 32 to 62 decibels at a distance of 15 meters, which is about where the inverters are here to where the water voles live. I don't think any animal will want to live in this location. The other issue is flooding. This is the Kamek Pond here. This is where the inverters go. This is flood zones 2 and 3. This photo was taken last year. West Sussex County Council lead flood authority are concerned that this development will increase flooding and have strongly objected to this application. Again, I make the point, we are not opposed to solar, but this is the wrong location. Talk a bit about what the motivations are for solar farms and who benefits. Call this the solar rush. Solar farm operators receive £1,000 to £1,200 an acre every year, compared to an income of maybe £250 an acre per year from traditional farming. So you can see why farmers are tempted to get out of farming because they can earn so much more from solar. But what the question I raise is what about food production? You know, if all this land here, which is quite possible it can happen, goes to solar, where are we getting our food from? In our opinion, the government needs to do more to encourage farmers to grow food. When BNRG Langmead first promoted this project, they claimed that the energy generated was going into the grid and would power the equivalent electricity needed for approximately 9,062 residences. However, they now advise that they intend to take all of it via an overhead private line directly into Chichester Food Park, where they wash and bag salad for McDonald's. Chichester Food Park is owned by Robert Langmead, the applicant's brother. The only motivation here is money. This is not about the environment and reducing carbon. This is about making money. Oh, and of course, CDC would also financially benefit as they would earn business rates on the land, 122 acres. So there's a motivation there as well. Okay, this is a CGI of the computer-generated image of the solar farm. This is the western portion here. Incidentally, there's a new application in this week by David Langmead's brother for up here for just north of this for another 124 acres of solar farm with battery storage all across here, all across this land. And this is grade 1 and 2, high grade agricultural land. It's about money. The contract for a period for a solar farm is 40 years. I would question, technology is changing so fast that we predict that the current solar specification will be out of date in maybe 10 years. Yet we're locked in for 40 years. Every day there are new developments and innovations. It doesn't make sense to lock this in for 40 days. Someone earlier spoke about, Tim spoke about the pipeline from Morocco. You know, there's an awful lot of sun in Morocco, and it makes a lot of sense to put solar panels there. Not quite so much sense here. Yes, we get a lot of sunshine down here in the south of England, but that is also why crops grow so well down here, why the fields can be so effective for food production. The other point is solar panels. I'm sure the other guys will back me up on this, but solar panels degrade by 1% every year. So these panels have to actually be replaced during the duration, maybe 2 times over the 40-year period. My other point, I'm really in favour of wind power as well. One turbine out in the channel would produce enough for more power than 2 times this solar farm. 1 turbine. If you want to make power, stick a turbine out there. You know, don't have an issue with that. It's much more effective. The other point I'd like to discuss is decommissioning. I've recently had my first grandchild, and I've got a 4-month-old grandson. Will actually be in his 40s when it comes to deal with the decommissioning of this. There's no detail for how the decommissioning will be carried out. It's simply explained as do everything in reverse. So in reality, we are leaving this responsibility to our future generations. The other point is the cost of decommissioning. We've estimated that in today's money, decommissioning and environmental disposal will cost 7 million for this solar farm, 122 acres. If the current operator goes bankrupt in the next 40 years, who picks up that cost? There's no bond, no one's tied in to do this. Who picks it up? Our future generation. We do, or our grandkids do. I don't think that's fair. My next slide is talking about actually how green is this? How environmental are we on this? Nearly all solar panels are manufactured in China. China, biggest producer of CO2. As I'm sure you are all aware, they account for 33% of the world's emissions. UK, 0.88%. This solar farm that I'm objecting to, they would need 250 40-foot shipping containers full up with panels, frames, inverters, travelling 14,000 miles all the way to South Mundham. That makes sense? They also have declared 60 HGVs of concrete and aggregate, 48 HGVs of wire fencing, 48 HGVs to create access tracks, a 40-ton mobile crane. Now wait for this one, 240 HGVs of waste from the site. Where does that waste go? In the ground? Burnt? I don't know. At the end of the 40-year period, where's all this disposed? All the glass, the plastic, the metal, the wire fencing, the electrics, the broken up concrete. Where does it go? Where does it end up? Perhaps we'll ship it to another country and give them the problem. I don't know. No one's planning for the 40-year solution. Now, on a more positive side, sorry for all the negativity, there is a positive side to this. We are really good, and we're good at this country as well, at innovation. Lots of new products coming out, solar paint. The Chinese actually were the first to put solar on a satellite up in space. Someone's come up with an idea, why not put solar between railway tracks? It's just dead space not being used, and 90% of the time it hasn't got a train running through it. Solar that can be applied to glass, in films, in commercial, residential, horticulture, floating solar panels. We all know about Rampion 2 wind farm. Great, really excited about that project. Would power 1 million homes, equivalent to 1 million homes, 2 times West Sussex, Sussex, I think, in fact. Hydro, tidal, you can see it all up there. Solar roof tiles, heat pumps, Tom mentioned earlier, fantastic. That's a positive. And in the words of our true leader, David Attenborough, you know, I just leave you with that statement there. It's our responsibility. The planet's for everyone, not just for us, it's for everyone. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Mark. That was very, very interesting and very worrying. In the past, I've been a big campaigner against an oil development that was planned near here at Forestside, and early story about the presentations that I recognise so many things, and the worries about decommissioning as well. You know, there are lots and lots of parallels there. So one of the things I'd like to ask you was, and don't worry if you say this is your opinion, it's not, you can't be sued. How reliable do you feel that Langmeads themselves are? You know, I mean, if they promise to do something, will they do it?
I don't know. I have no knowledge. What specifically were you thinking of?
Well, I can just remember, you know, reading planning applications where you could very easily find the holes in the arguments. You know, with the oil, they were saying, you know, there was so many billion barrels of oil in place, and then when you read the small print, only 15% of that could be recovered at best. You know, that kind of thing.
Well, we've had a lot of changes. I mean, first of all, we were told that all the equipment for the solar farm would be brought in via agricultural vehicles. That was then dismissed. We were then told it's going to be a maximum of 200 HGVs. We got an expert involved. They crunched some numbers and they said, no, that's not right. It's a lot bigger than that. So 200 vehicles has turned into 960 vehicles now. It's a moving feast. We've had to employ consultants. We are spending so much time on analysing 1,500 pages of documents. It's a nightmare, absolute nightmare. Yeah, it's you're chasing the thing and trying to find the accurate information all the time with your hands tied behind your back. Yeah.
Thank you. Isabel, you've got a question.
Thank you. I can't put my video back on for some reason.
You're not the first person to say that.
You've stopped it apparently. I turned it off for a minute and then I couldn't get it back on. Anyway, doesn't matter. You don't have to see me. I shall. Thank you very much, Mark. It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? That I just think it's what we've created. We've created a monster. Our society just doesn't work for the environment. Basically, it's exactly the same with the wind farm off the coast of Bognor here. It has to be done by a huge power company that actually runs, you know, coal-powered fire stations in Germany, for example. It's the same company. They're just doing wind farms in the sea because it's a business like any other for them. So, you know, this is the point. The point is that it's the way we operate. Whilst solar, we all believe that solar power is a brilliant thing and we must do it. It's only these kind of greedy, large-scale people that can kind of fiddle it. I was very interested by what you said about Langmead. Can it really be the case that one Langmead is taking the subsidies or the payment, sorry, not subsidy, but the payment on the land for the panels, and all the power will go to the other Langmead for his business? Is that really?
Well, I think they're both involved. They are both owners of Nature's Way, which is the main business in Chichester Food Park. But I mean, the other issue obviously is grid capacity. If you don't have a contract lined up to pump this power into the grid, then they find other ways. And
right, so the Nature's Way would be paying for the power, or they would get it free because it's.
I think what happens is he'll be David Langmead will be passing it all on to Chichester Food Park, and the tenant in Chichester Food Park will be will be paying him for the power. I think that's how it's going to work.
So then they can just say they're carbon neutral business. Or
They
something.
are saying that, yes.
It's unbelievable that they need that much space for just that business, though, isn't it? It's incredible. And again, why don't they pop it on their roofs? I suppose they're greenhouses, aren't they?
I did actually put a proposal up. They have put, in fairness, they've put some panels up there. In my understanding as a token gesture, but I did put a proposal. There's a lot of land there that they could a whole plethora of different renewables on.
Just easier for them to do it on the brothers' fields.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the only other thing I would say, just don't take this too personally.
No.
But we in the Green Party, we're very hot on this whole argument that so many people say the thing about China being a massive producer of emissions. Well, you know, it doesn't wash in because they produce most of our stuff. We've offloaded it to them. That's the argument against using that. It's not fair to say that, really, because I mean they're a massively larger country than us, but they do produce all our plastic junk. So we need to stop that happening. That's the main thing. And also they are trying to go down they're doing a huge amount of solar as well. It obviously is with the whole world needs to be seen as a whole for climate emissions.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
I'm going to cut you short there because that's starting to get into debate.
Yeah, no, just to point out that you know, I absolutely agree with you about the production of the solar panels and everything you said about the resources they use and the waste of, you know, all the minerals and all the stuff that goes into everything we use. Really, I completely agree with you. It's all. I don't know what the answers are. I'll hand over to Tim. He might.
One thing I was going to say to you, Isabel, which I meant to say within that. The thing in France is every new car park, get it out, every new car park has to have solar panels on. That's the French thing.
Yeah, I just checked. It's also commercial buildings.
Warehouses as well, you're correct.
Which means that France has done a good thing there.
They have.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's where they ought to be, actually.
Yep, definitely.
So, thank you. It's a crazy scheme, and let's hope they don't pass it.
Tim's in the right business. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Tim,
you.
would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Great presentation and real passion there, obviously. Mark, the point that I really want to ask, I've got a couple of general points about the presentation in terms of detail and but real detail. But the big one for me, which I wasn't aware of, and I'm a district councillor, I did not know that this electricity, and we've talked about this already in the presentation, so it's a very timely point, that this electricity is going to effectively package salads in McDonald's packaging.
Correct. Yeah.
So this is not going in the global market. This is not going into the local grid. This is a private project that's
straight into Chichester Food Park. Yes. There's a pre-app been in for that. Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, I do. From my point of view, I think that changes everything. Because I think that's not what we understand by and nothing particularly against McDonald's. Well, apart from the obvious, but McDonald's and plastic packaging. I mean, that's just not, you know. So I think that does change everything. And I think that's the key point because when we hear solar farm, you know, all the conversations we've had tonight have been about carbon reductions and Tom's excellent presentation, and this is just I don't see it in that vein at all. So I think that's the key point for me. If that's what's happening, if they haven't got
the applicant's agent had stood up at a presentation and told us the plan now is to take all the energy directly in to Chichester Food Park and use it for their needs there.
Can I just ask for clarification on that? Because I think you said originally the power would be enough for 9,000 households.
That's how the proposal was marketed in the first place.
But I mean, is
By the
Chichester
applicant.
not so big that it will use that much electricity?
Well, we when this first came up, we said, what is Chichester Food Park's requirement? Well, it was originally for Nature's Way, but then they said, oh no, we want to do it for all of Chichester Food Park. Okay, how much energy do you need? We don't know. Well, how do you know that the putting solar on your roofs won't be enough for that? Well, it's confidential. We're carrying out a in-depth, high-level study, and we are working that. We've never got the answer to that, but subsequently we've been told that it's not going into the grid. It's all going on a private overhead line into the food park. The 33 megawatts.
Tom, does that sound realistic to you?
What's the question?
That all the electricity produced on that solar farm could be used in the food park?
If you think about it, in a global point of view, it doesn't really matter, does it? If that current food park is consuming that amount of electricity and it's getting it directly from a locally sourced solar farm, that means all the electricity that's not using can be used elsewhere. So
no, I was thinking more in terms of the amount. You know, would the food park require as much as 9,000 homes? Does that?
I have no idea.
It just seems unrealistic to me.
I have no idea, and to be honest, I don't think that matters.
It's about honesty, Tom, and
okay, yeah, I get that, but as far as from a high-level point of view, from carbon emissions, it doesn't really matter where the food park gets its electricity from. If that solar farm is generating the electricity, it doesn't really matter where it's consumed. It is reducing the carbon emissions of UK.
But it's worth it'd be worth finding out if they really could use that amount of electricity.
I do concur with Mark about the developer. Langmead do not have a good reputation locally.
In your opinion.
I think solar farms can be a really good biodiversity resource if it's managed well in that way. And I've been asking Langmead or the developer to give me examples of where Langmeads have enhanced biodiversity on their current projects, and they haven't furnished me any information yet.
They've sold them all on as well, Tom, in fairness.
The other farms.
Yeah. Most of them have been sold on.
Right, Tim, I'm sorry I interrupted you because I know you had more questions.
Yeah, I did. And Mark, these are more sort of general style points, I suppose, or just fine tuning. But there is a question I guess I would ask if I was a neighbour. If I was a neighbour, I realise that you've got the passion because it's your local area. But there is a question about, would you rather have organic land with panels or wheat fields with Langmead style herbicides and pesticides? And I've worked on a Langmead farm when I was a kid, and I remember the awful stuff they were putting on the crops. So there is that question of the health effect. If you're a neighbour, what would you rather have? And I think we automatically have a knee-jerk reaction to what we can see, the panels, as opposed to what we can't see, the herbicides, the pesticides. And
Tim, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there because that's getting into debating.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, in that case, just really quickly. I mean, that was just a question. To your point about replacing the panels. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They do degrade. It's a chemical process. They degrade by about 0.5% a year. So about 12% over 25 years. But they do degrade. It's by about 0.5% a year. There is a question. It's just a question for about, you mentioned the point about flooding, and I would question whether high quality soil rich in organic matter, as it would be after 10 years of sitting dormant, versus an overfarmed, overploughed monoculture, and which sort of feeds into the question about wildlife versus biodiversity. And it's really just, the slide you showed of the of the wheat field, that, I mean, that's monoculture, that's not biodiversity. So I take the point completely about the water voles in the field. And I'm speaking now not with a solar hat on, but just as, you know, as an
Tim, I'm sorry, that's debating again. So I'm going to
debating. So it's a question. So it's a question. An important point, though, I was going to say is that food is bought and sold on the global market. If the US paid more for food than the UK could, it would be going to the US. So I don't take the point about food security.
I totally disagree with you there.
Really? Okay.
But I'm not going to debate because
fine. No, neither am I. It's just a style point. So, but
we are also reaching the end of our time. So I would like to thank all three speakers. I especially would like to thank Mark, because I was trying to protect you from any sort of arguments, but
I can look after myself.
Okay. Thank you for being so understanding. That really has been very helpful.
Thanks, guys.
Because it just goes to show the importance of having local knowledge as well, doesn't it? And that is one of the things that devolution is going to we're going to lose on that. Very quickly, Tom, your hand's up.
Just a point of information, as I said before, I'm a director of a community benefit society that owns the Meadow Blue solar farm. It's got a huge thriving water vole population on the farm, and so solar farms don't prohibit water voles. In fact, they're doing very well.
Do you also have sheep on there, Tom? Because I haven't seen any.
Yes, there has been sheep on there. In fact, I was there the other day and there were sheep on there.
Okay.
They're not there all the time because then you overgraze and you destroy the
just for the photos.
Yeah. I have just been reading up on what literature there is, and basically it's very early days for actual scientific studies, isn't it? And with the water voles in particular, there's not a lot of information yet on mammals as such, although it's clear that the diversity of flowers and the diversity of insects do seem to improve under certain management. And obviously that will happen on the whole chain. But apart from that, I'm going to say thank you very much. Thank you, all three speakers. Thank you for everybody for getting so involved. And I found it really, really interesting. But then I'm a nerd. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as much as I have.
Very much.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. It was really good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.